Emily had always been fascinated by photography. She saw the world through her lens, capturing moments that others might miss. Lately, though, something strange had started happening. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but it felt off. It began with a picture of her cat, Whiskers. The little tabby was sunbathing in their tiny backyard, the golden light casting long shadows. Emily snapped a few shots and reviewed them on her camera's screen. Everything looked fine at first, until she noticed it. In the top left corner stood an uninvited guest, a blurred figure, barely discernible against the background of their old wooden fence. She squinted, trying to make out any details, but all she could see was a vague humanoid shape. Emily shrugged it off, attributing it to camera shake or lens flare. But then it happened again. Every time she took a photo, there it was, the extra person. Always in the same spot, always just as blurry. She tried different cameras, thinking perhaps her old one was malfunctioning. No luck. The figure persisted. Emily started to feel a creeping unease whenever she raised her camera. It was like someone was watching her, standing just out of frame. Yet, every time she turned around, there was nothing but empty air. She found herself rationalizing it away. Stress-induced hallucinations, perhaps, or some strange psychological phenomenon. One evening, Emily decided to test her theory. If the figure was merely a trick of light and shadow, then capturing it on camera should be easy enough. She set up tripods in various spots around their house, pointing them towards the most frequent sightings. Then she triggered all the cameras simultaneously, snapping multiple exposures. Hours later, as she sat at her computer importing the images, she felt a growing sense of dread. The figure was clearer now, more distinct than ever before. It seemed to be looking directly at her, its face still too blurred to make out clearly. But there was something undeniably wrong about it. An unnatural angle to its body. An eerie stillness that defied the gentle breeze rustling through the trees. Emily tried to tell herself she was being silly, that this couldn't possibly be real. Yet, as she stared at the figure on her screen, she felt a cold prickle run down her spine. For the first time since moving into their little house, she didn't feel alone. And that scared her more than anything. Emily couldn't shake off the feeling of unease that had settled over her like a thick fog. She found herself constantly checking her surroundings, half expecting to see the figure standing there, solid and real this time. But every time she looked, there was nothing. Determined not to let this strange phenomenon disrupt her life, Emily decided to confront it head-on. She set up an experiment, taking pictures from the same spot at regular intervals throughout the day and night. If this thing was real, maybe she could catch it moving, doing something that would give away its true nature. She also started documenting each sighting, noting down the time, location, and any other relevant details. Perhaps there was a pattern to be found, some clue that would explain what was happening. Emily was no scientist, but she figured if she could rule out all the logical possibilities, then maybe, just maybe, she'd be left with something truly extraordinary. Days turned into weeks. The figure appeared in every photo, always in the same place, always growing clearer. Its face began to emerge from the blur, like a developing Polaroid. Emily found herself studying it obsessively, trying to discern any features that might hint at its identity. There was something familiar about it, yet she couldn't quite put her finger on what. One day, while reviewing some photos taken near dusk, Emily gasped. The figure's face was no longer just a suggestion of lines and shadows. Now, it was unmistakably human. And it looked wrong. Its eyes seemed too large, too dark, and its mouth was twisted into a grimace that seemed almost sadistic. Her heart pounded as she zoomed in closer, her breath fogging up the screen. She could see every detail now. The hollow cheeks, the sharp chin, the wayward strands of hair that seemed to float around its head like tendrils. This wasn't some trick of light or camera malfunction. This was something else entirely. Suddenly, a noise echoed through the house, a soft thump, followed by another and another, like footsteps, but too slow, too deliberate. Emily's blood ran cold. She forced herself to turn around, her eyes scanning the empty room. The house was silent now, but Emily couldn't shake off the lingering echo of those slow, heavy footsteps. She sat at her desk, staring at the figure on her computer screen, trying to reconcile this eerie phenomenon with the world she thought she knew. Her mind raced as she tried to come up with explanations. Ghost? Sure, why not? She'd always been skeptical, but now she wasn't so sure. Maybe there was something to all those stories after all. Or maybe it was something else entirely. A glitch in reality. A portal opening up right in her backyard. As days passed, the figure continued to appear in every photo Emily took. His face grew clearer still, its expression turning from malevolent to almost pleading. It seemed to be reaching out towards her, its hands stretched forward, fingers splayed wide. The sight sent chills down her spine, but she couldn't look away. Then came the night when everything changed. Emily had been working late, editing photos for an upcoming exhibition. She was exhausted, her eyes burning from staring at the screen too long. As she finally saved her last edit and stretched, she heard it again. Those slow footsteps echoing through the house. She froze, listening intently. They were louder now, more insistent, closer. With a trembling hand, Emily reached for her camera, placing it on her desk so that it pointed towards the door. She hit record, the small red light blinking as it captured every second of what was about to happen. The footsteps stopped outside her room. A pause. Then a soft knock at the door. 3 slow raps, like knuckles tapping against wood. Emily's heart pounded in her ears, her breath shallow and fast. She couldn't move, couldn't speak. All she could do was watch as the handle turned slowly, deliberately. The door creaked open, revealing nothing but empty hallway. But then, a shadow flickered at the edge of her vision. That same blurred figure from her photos. It stood in the doorway now, its face clear enough for Emily to see every detail. And it wasn't just wrong, it was terrifying. Its eyes were completely black, like endless pools swallowing all light. Its mouth gaped open, revealing row upon row of sharp teeth, too many to fit in any human mouth. As it stepped into the room, Emily finally found her voice, screaming until her throat raw. Emily's scream echoed through the house, shattering the silence and her own sanity. The figure lunged at her, its movements too fast, too jerky, like stop-motion animation played at high speed. She stumbled back, tripping over her chair and crashing to the floor. The creature loomed over her, its mouth open wide, a low growl rumbling from deep within its chest. It reached out towards her, its fingers elongating into sharp talons that clicked against each other like castanets. Emily could see every detail now, the veins of pulsating darkness beneath its skin, the way its body seemed to absorb light instead of reflecting it. She covered her face with her arms, squeezing her eyes shut as she braced for impact. But nothing happened. Instead, there was a sudden silence, followed by a faint hissing sound. When Emily finally peeked through her fingers, she saw that the figure had vanished. In its place stood something else entirely. A man. He was dressed in old-fashioned clothes, a waistcoat and breeches, a cravat around his neck. His hair was slicked back, his face clean-shaven. But most striking of all were his eyes. They were completely white, milky, and sightless. A blind man standing right where the creature had been moments before. "Who are you?" Emily whispered, her voice hoarse from screaming. The man didn't answer. He just stood there, his head tilted slightly to one side as if listening intently. Then he spoke, his voice deep and resonant. "You can see me now." A chill ran down Emily's spine. "What do you mean?" "I've been trying to reach out," he said, taking a step closer. "But no one could see me until you started taking pictures." Emily felt a sense of unease wash over her. "Are you dead?" she asked softly. The man nodded slowly. "Yes. And I need your help." She stared at him, her mind racing with questions. How was this possible? Why could she see him now when no one else could? What did he want from her? Before she could ask any of these questions aloud, the man's expression turned grim. "There's something else here," he warned. "Something dark and dangerous. It's been using me as a doorway, sneaking through when I try to communicate with the living." Emily's blood ran cold. She thought back to the creature she'd seen moments earlier. Its twisted face, its sharp teeth. That was no ghost. That was something else entirely. The man reached out towards her, his hand stretching until it became a tendril of darkness, just like the creature's had been. "We need to stop it," he urged, "before it finds another way in." Emily looked at his outstretched hand, then up into those milky eyes. She knew she should be afraid, but all she felt was determination. Whatever this thing was, whatever it wanted, she would not let it hurt anyone else. "All right," she said, taking a deep breath. "Tell me what to do."